What would you do if a dying woman asked you to break the law for her one final wish? On a lonely stretch of the North Carolina coast, an aging lighthouse keeper named Ethan Brooks carries a secret that's been drowning him for 15 years. A mistake that cost 23 lives. When a terminally ill nurse named Marjorie Hill arrives after a storm, she asks for one final wish: to see the lighthouse shine again before she dies. If you believe that forgiveness still has power, even after the storm, please like this video and subscribe, so stories of faith and redemption like this one can keep shining. Stay with us, because this isn't just a story about death. It's the true story of how one promise brought the light and a man's soul back to life. Down by the shore, an ambulance skidded to a stop. A woman stepped out, her raincoat whipping in the wind. Her name was Marjorie Hill, a 60-year-old nurse from Raleigh. She had driven 4 hours through the hurricane because she'd promised the church she'd help the storm victims. But no one told her she would end up here, at the edge of the world, with no signal, no power, and a lighthouse that hadn't worked in years. Inside, the keeper watched her from the tower window. Ethan Brooks, 70, white, retired Navy, a man who had spent half his life staring at the sea, and the other half trying to forget it. He saw the ambulance lights and muttered to himself, "Lord help us, another soul come to drown." When morning came, the storm was gone, but the damage stayed. Fallen trees, flooded homes, dead fish on the sand. Marjorie's hands were trembling as she stitched a fisherman's leg inside the tiny shack that served as the town's clinic. She coughed hard, covering her mouth with a handkerchief. The blood stain on it was small, but she saw it and hid it fast. Her illness had been growing for months. The doctors said she needed rest. But rest wasn't something people like Marjorie could afford. She had no husband, no family left. Just a promise to herself that she'd keep helping others until she couldn't anymore. That night, she walked up the hill toward the lighthouse, hoping to ask for blankets. The wind had calmed, but the sea still roared below like something alive. The door creaked open, and Ethan stood there, tall, gray, his face carved by salt and guilt. "You're not supposed to be up here," he said. "I just needed a little light," she answered softly. "There's no light here," he replied. "Not anymore." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's what we're both missing." For a long moment, they just stood there. Two strangers, two colors, two worlds, bound by the same emptiness. Later, as Marjorie walked back down the path, her cough echoed against the cliffs. She looked back once at the tower, a dark silhouette against the moonlit fog, and whispered, "God, don't let me die before I see that light again." Down below, Ethan poured himself another drink. On his table lay a faded photograph, a shipwreck, a headline, and a name circled in red: James Hill, her husband. The man who died the night Ethan forgot to turn the light on. The storm had passed, but the reckoning had just begun. Ethan Brooks had once been a man people trusted. Born in a small Carolina town, raised by a preacher father who believed a man's duty is to guide others home, he joined the Navy at 19, served for 30 years, and became the lighthouse keeper after retirement. But one mistake, one drunken night, had drowned 23 men and left him alone with ghosts. He'd been keeping that tower ever since, not to save ships, but to punish himself. Every creak of the stairwell, every crash of a wave was his sentence. Marjorie Hill, on the other hand, had spent her life saving strangers. The daughter of a sharecropper, she'd worked through nursing school, raised 2 foster kids, and spent every Sunday praying for people who never knew her name. She didn't believe in hate. She believed in grace. But that night, when she saw the dark tower and the man who lived inside, something stirred, a feeling she couldn't name, part anger, part sorrow. She didn't know his story, and he didn't know hers. But fate, or maybe forgiveness, was already pulling them toward each other. One dying woman searching for light, one broken man trying to hide from it. And above them, the old lighthouse waited, silent, rusted, and ready to burn again. Morning came slow to the coast. The sea was calm again, but the air still smelled like iron and rain. Seagulls circled the wreckage of boats along the bay. From the lighthouse window, Ethan Brooks watched as people began rebuilding what the storm had taken. He saw her again, the nurse from Raleigh, Marjorie Hill, handing out blankets, patching wounds, her small figure moving between the broken houses like a beam of light. He didn't want to admit it, but there was something about her that unsettled him. Maybe it was the way she prayed before touching anyone's wound, or the way people trusted her even when she said nothing. Ethan hadn't prayed in years. He used to believe in God's mercy, but mercy had skipped his address long ago. That evening, Marjorie came to the lighthouse again. She brought a loaf of cornbread and a jar of honey, said it was a thank you for letting her use the supply shed. Ethan didn't invite her in, but she came anyway, sitting quietly by the window as the wind moaned through the cracks. "You live alone up here?" she asked. "Been that way for 15 years. Must get lonely." Ethan shrugged. "The sea talks enough for two." She smiled faintly, cutting a piece of bread. "Maybe you should try listening to people instead." He wanted to tell her she didn't understand, that people brought pain and the sea at least stayed honest. But instead he said, "You're not from around here." "No, Raleigh. I was supposed to retire last year. Never got around to it." "Why not?" Marjorie's eyes softened. "Because people don't stop needing help, Mr. Brooks. Not even when you're tired." The words stuck to him longer than he wanted them to. Days passed. The power returned to most of the town, but the lighthouse stayed dark. Ethan said it was fine that way. "No one needs it anymore," he muttered. But one night, when the fog rolled in thick as smoke, he found Marjorie standing at the cliff's edge, staring toward the sea. "Careful," he warned. "That cliff's not forgiving." She didn't move. "I had a dream last night about a ship that lost its light. It was calling for help, but no one came." Ethan froze. She turned to him, her face pale in the mist. "Maybe it was just the storm talking," she said softly, then coughed until her knees gave out. Ethan caught her before she fell. Her hand was cold, trembling. "You need a doctor," he said. "I've seen enough of them," she whispered. "They told me what I already knew. This body's just getting tired." He didn't ask more. He carried her inside, laid her by the fire. As the flames flickered, Marjorie looked around the tower, at the rusted gears, the dusty lamps, the broken lens above them. "Why'd you stop lighting it?" she asked. Ethan stared into the fire. "Because some things don't deserve to be seen again." She nodded, as if she understood something he couldn't say. That night, long after she'd fallen asleep, Ethan sat by the window, the bottle untouched beside him. Outside, the foghorn moaned. Somewhere below, waves lapped against the rocks, steady, endless. He looked at the dark lantern above, the cables hanging loose, the glass cracked from years of neglect. It was like him, a machine built to save others that had forgotten how. Downstairs, Marjorie stirred in her sleep, whispering a prayer. He couldn't hear all the words, only fragments. Light, forgiveness, home. And for the first time in 15 years, Ethan felt something stir in his chest. Not peace, not guilt, but the faint memory of what hope used to sound like. The lighthouse stayed dark that night, but for reasons Ethan didn't understand yet, it didn't feel as cold. The next morning came quiet. Too quiet for the coast. The sky was pale gray, the kind that holds its breath before another storm. Ethan Brooks woke before dawn, his bones aching from the damp air. Downstairs, he heard the soft sound of Marjorie moving about, making tea, humming a gospel tune under her breath. He watched her from the staircase. She looked smaller in the morning light, frail but calm, as if she'd already made peace with something he couldn't name. "You don't sleep much," he said. She smiled without turning. "Neither do you." He nodded. "You still coughing?" "A little, but I've had worse." She poured 2 cups, handing him one. "Tea helps the breathing. At least, that's what my mama used to say." Ethan took the cup, his hands rough and trembling. "Your mama raised you near the coast?" "Not even close. We had no water, no lights, no anything. Just faith." She looked toward the sea, her eyes soft. "My husband used to love the ocean, though. Said the water was where God hides his mercy." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Your husband? He was a fisherman." Her lips pressed into a faint smile. "He was. James Hill. He worked the boats out of Wilmington. Died a long time ago. Storm caught them off guard. They said the lighthouse went dark that night." The words landed like stones. Ethan's throat went dry. He looked at her, this woman with kind eyes, coughing herself to death, and felt the blood drain from his face. She didn't notice his silence, or maybe she did, and was too gentle to ask why. Later that day, Ethan climbed the tower alone. The lens sat broken, covered in dust and cobwebs. He ran his hand along the cold glass. Beneath it, in a rusted file box, he found what he'd been avoiding for 15 years. The old Navy report, yellowed and brittle. Incident 1123. The Brooks Lighthouse failure. He read the line that had haunted him ever since. Operator under influence. Failure to ignite beacon. 23 casualties confirmed. He sat there for a long time, the paper shaking in his hands. The wind outside howled through the cracks like a confession he could never make. When he came back down, Marjorie was sitting by the fire, knitting something from an old gray scarf. "Cold up there?" she asked. He didn't answer. He just stared at her hands, steady, patient, alive. She looked up. "You carry something heavy, Mr. Brooks. I can feel it when you walk into a room." He swallowed hard. "We all carry something." She smiled gently. "Yes, but some of us mistake guilt for purpose." He wanted to say she was wrong. That guilt was all he had left. But instead he turned away, muttering, "You don't know me." "No," she said softly, "but I know what regret sounds like." That night, the wind picked up again. Ethan couldn't sleep. Every creak of the tower reminded him of that night, the bottle in his hand, the radio call he never answered, the flames on the water. He stumbled downstairs, opened the door to the storm, and let the rain soak him. The sea roared below like it was calling his name. Then he heard her cough, sharp, tearing, desperate. He rushed back inside. Marjorie had fallen to the floor, clutching her chest. He helped her onto the chair, his voice shaking. "You need to rest." "I'm fine," she whispered, though her breath rattled. I saw him again." "Who?" She looked past him, toward the window where the waves crashed in the distance. "James, standing by the water. He looked peaceful, like he was waiting for something." Ethan's voice broke. You think he forgave whoever let that light go dark? She blinked slowly. I think forgiveness doesn't belong to the guilty. It belongs to the ones strong enough to give it. The room went still. The rain eased to a whisper. Ethan turned away so she wouldn't see the tears in his eyes. That night, long after she'd gone back to sleep, he returned to the top of the tower. He stood before the broken lamp, the sea stretching out endless below him. And he whispered into the darkness, I'm sorry, James. I should have kept the light. The wind answered with a soft moan, almost like a voice saying, Then keep it now. For the first time in years, Ethan lit a small lamp beside him, just a flame, trembling against the storm. But it was light, and it was a start. The next few days came softer, quieter. The storms had passed, but the air still felt heavy, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. Marjorie spent most mornings by the window, the blanket around her shoulders, watching the gulls rise and fall over the gray water. Ethan fixed things around the lighthouse that hadn't been touched in years. The stairs, the railing, the old oil drum. He didn't say it out loud, but her presence had changed everything. One afternoon, she found him sitting on the porch, his hands blackened with soot. You're fixing the light, she said. He didn't look up. Just cleaning up what's left of it. That's not the same thing. He wiped his hands, sighing. The lamp's cracked, the wires are dead, and the Coast Guard shut this place down years ago. It's not coming back. Marjorie sat beside him. Then light it for yourself. He frowned. For what? For peace. She smiled faintly. Some lights don't shine for ships, Ethan. Some shine so the keeper can find his way home. He turned away, pretending to busy himself with the tools, but her words stayed in his chest. That night, he lay awake, listening to her cough echo down the hall. The sound was softer now, not better, just weaker. The next morning, he found her in the kitchen, a folded letter in her lap. You writing someone? He asked. She nodded. My husband. I know it's foolish, but sometimes it helps to talk to the dead. Ethan's voice cracked. Maybe it helps them hear you. She smiled. Maybe. Then she looked at him, her eyes clear and certain. Ethan, can I ask you for something? He hesitated. If I can give it. I want to see that light again, just once, before I go. He froze. You don't know what you're asking. Yes, I do. Her voice was calm. It's not about saving anyone out there. It's about saving you. You've been punishing yourself for 15 years, and it hasn't brought any of them back. He clenched his jaw. You don't understand what I did. I understand you stopped living the night they died. He turned toward the sea, his eyes wet. If I light that lamp, I'll see every face I failed. Marjorie reached out, placing her hand over his. Then light it for the faces still here. For a long time, he didn't speak. The waves broke gently below, the gulls crying in the wind. That night, he climbed the stairs again, not with a bottle this time, but with purpose. The steps creaked under his boots. When he reached the top, he set the lantern on the floor and began cleaning the lens, wiping away years of dust. His hands trembled, but he kept working. Below, Marjorie sat in the chair by the window, the letter still on her lap. Her breath came slow, shallow. She whispered into the darkness. God, let him find his light before mine fades. Hours passed. Ethan worked through the night. By dawn, the lamp was clean, the gears oiled, the old generator rumbling like a heartbeat. But the wires sparked weakly, too weak to reach the bulb. He slammed his fist on the metal frame. Come on, he muttered, voice breaking. Just one more time. Then he heard her, faint from below. Promise me you'll light it. He froze, staring at the dead lamp, the fog thick outside the glass. I promise, he whispered. He grabbed the oil can, poured what little he had left into the base, and struck a match. The flame sputtered, then caught. A dim light flickered through the cracked glass. Small, trembling, but real. Down below, Marjorie lifted her head. The glow touched her face, soft and golden. For the first time in months, she smiled, not at him, not even at the world, but at peace itself. Ethan kept the light burning until the morning sun rose behind it. His hands were blistered, his eyes red, but he didn't stop. When he finally came down, Marjorie was asleep in her chair, the letter still open beside her. He touched her shoulder gently. Marjorie, the light's on. She didn't answer. He stood there for a long time, the dawn spilling through the window, washing over them both. The promise had been kept, even if she never saw it again. The storm returned the following week. It came without warning, a wall of gray clouds swallowing the horizon, the sea roaring like something alive. Ethan Brooks could feel it in his bones before the first drop fell. He stood at the window, staring at the water as lightning flashed far out in the distance. Downstairs, Marjorie lay in her bed, her breathing shallow and uneven. The small lamp beside her flickered as if even it was struggling to stay alive. Ethan knelt beside her. You should have left when the road was still open, he said quietly. She smiled weakly. And miss the show? No, I'll stay. Maybe God's sending one last light for us both. He looked at her, wanting to say something, but words had long since failed him. Her hand trembled as she reached for his. Ethan, she whispered, don't let it go dark tonight. Promise me that. He hesitated, then nodded. I promise. Thunder cracked overhead. Rain began to hammer the roof. The old glass panes rattled as wind howled through the tower like a voice from another world. Ethan looked up the staircase leading to the lantern room. 120 steps that suddenly felt like judgment. He grabbed his coat, his boots, and the can of oil, then turned back to her. Rest now, he said. You'll see it soon. Her eyes softened. Then I'll be waiting. Ethan climbed the stairs as the storm raged around him. The tower shook under the force of the wind. Water poured through the cracks, soaking the floor. At the top, the lantern glass shuddered with every gust. He reached the platform, coughing from the smoke of the old generator. The wires had burned out days ago. The only thing left was the small lamp he'd lit for her, that fragile flame still holding on. He set it inside the main reflector, shielding it with his hands, whispering a prayer he hadn't spoken in decades. Let it burn. Just this once, Lord. Let it burn. Lightning struck nearby, blinding white. For a second, everything went silent. Then the light caught. The flame spread across the oil wick, brighter than it had any right to be. The old beacon came alive, glowing through the fog, cutting a path across the waves. Below, in the small room by the window, Marjorie opened her eyes. Her chest rose slowly, and a faint smile touched her lips. The light reached her face, golden, soft, warm. I see it, she whispered. It's beautiful. Outside, the storm howled, but the beacon refused to die. It stood tall against the wind, defiant, steady, as if guided by something greater than any man's hand. Ethan held the railing, the rain lashing his face, the flame reflecting in his eyes. He thought of James Hill, of that night years ago, of every man who had called his name through the radio. And he thought of Marjorie. the woman who'd come into his darkness carrying a prayer instead of a torch. Down below, her breathing slowed, softer with each second. When lightning flashed again, she was still, her smile frozen in peace. Ethan looked down through the glass. He knew without going that she was gone. But the light, their light, still burned. He stayed there until dawn, soaked to the bone, his hands blistered from the heat of the lamp. When the storm finally broke and the sea turned calm again, he was still at the top of the tower, watching the sun rise through the thinning fog. The first rays of morning reached the water, painting it gold. The lighthouse gleamed. When the townspeople came hours later, they found the door open, the beacon still shining. Ethan sat beside the lantern, his coat draped over his shoulders, eyes closed, face calm, like a man finally forgiven. And in the distance, that light still reached across the waves, steady, unwavering, as if the keeper himself refused to let it fade. Morning broke over the coast with a silence that felt almost sacred. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, broken fences, driftwood scattered across the beach, the air heavy with the scent of salt and wet earth. By the time the rescue crew reached the lighthouse, the sun was already rising over the sea. They climbed the narrow stairs, flashlights cutting through the dim gray light. When they reached the top, they found Ethan Brooks sitting by the lantern, his hands folded, the great light still glowing beside him. He looked peaceful, like a man who had finally come home. Downstairs, in the small room below, they found Marjorie Hill. The blanket still covered her shoulders, her face turned toward the window. Her eyes were closed, but there was a faint smile on her lips. The light from above touched her skin like a blessing. The townspeople buried them side by side near the edge of the cliff, overlooking the sea. For days after, people came to lay flowers, fishermen, widows, children, strangers. No one could explain it, but every night since the storm, the light in the tower still flickered on, even though the generator was gone. Some said it was just a trick of the wind or the reflection of a passing ship. But those who knew better, those who had seen the glow, said it was something else. A promise. Word spread across the small towns of the Carolina coast. Newspapers wrote of the keeper's light, calling it a story of forgiveness and grace. Churchgoers spoke of Marjorie Hill's faith, how even dying she'd asked only for the light to shine one more time. And about Ethan Brooks, the man who carried his guilt like a cross until the very end. One evening, months later, a woman arrived with a single sunflower in her hand. She stood at the cliff's edge, watching the lighthouse through the fog. Her name was Angela, Marjorie's daughter, who had been living up north. She had read about the story in a local paper, and for the first time in years, made the drive back home. She placed the flower between the two headstones and whispered, "Mama, you kept your promise." When she looked up, the light in the tower blinked once, bright and steady. She wiped her tears, a quiet laugh breaking through her sobs. And so did he. That night, the wind picked up again, carrying the smell of the sea through the town. An old fisherman sitting by the dock looked toward the lighthouse and said softly, "They're still keeping watch." And maybe they were, because every storm after that, when the sky turned black and the waves rose high, the light always came on, shining through the rain, guiding the boats home. No one ever found the source. But in that small coastal town, they didn't need to. They just called it the Keeper's Promise, the light that never died. In time, the town rebuilt, stronger than before. The people spoke of Ethan and Marjorie not as ghosts, but as guardians. proof that forgiveness could outlast guilt, that love could bridge even the darkest storm. Sometimes, on quiet nights, when the tide was low and the sky was clear, the sea would glow faintly beneath the tower, and the people swore they could see two figures standing together at the top, one tall and still, one small and gentle, watching over the water. The world kept moving. The storms came and went. But the light, their light, stayed. Years passed. Seasons came and went, and the sea kept its rhythm, patient, eternal. The lighthouse still stood on the cliff, weathered but unbroken, its paint peeling, its glass streaked with salt. But when night fell, the light always found a way to shine. People began to tell the story like a legend, about the black nurse who came to a forgotten town, and the old keeper who had lost his faith. They called it the lighthouse keeper's promise, and every version ended the same, that in the darkest hour, two souls kept the light alive. Tourists came now and then, leaving flowers, taking pictures, whispering prayers. Some said they could feel warmth inside the tower, even on cold days. Others swore they heard humming, a woman's soft voice carrying an old hymn through the stone walls. Angela Hill returned every year on the same date. She'd bring sunflowers, just like her mother loved, and sit quietly on the bench facing the sea. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low, she'd talk to them both, to Marjorie, her mother, and to Ethan, the stranger who'd helped her believe in goodness again. She told them about the clinic she opened in Raleigh, the Marjorie Hill Foundation for Coastal Families, built to help storm victims and retired seamen. On its sign, beneath her mother's name, were the words, "Keep the light." One evening, as the sun bled gold across the water, she said softly, "You did it, Mama. You saved more people than you'll ever know." Then she looked at the lighthouse, still glowing in the distance, and added, "And you too, Mr. Brooks. You kept your promise." The tide rolled in, slow and steady, whispering against the rocks. Somewhere above, the beacon turned, steady and patient, sweeping its light across the horizon. To those who still believed, it wasn't just a light anymore. It was faith itself. Proof that even the broken can shine again, that forgiveness isn't weakness, and that love, in its truest form, never fades. Old fishermen would tell their grandchildren, "That's no machine up there. That's mercy." And the children, wide-eyed, would stare at the tower glowing through the fog, clutching their parents' hands tighter. Because deep down, everyone in that town knew. That light wasn't built by steel or flame. It was built by two people who chose compassion over pride, grace over guilt. And though their names faded from newspaper clippings and their graves grew soft with moss, the story never died. Every time the storms rolled in from the Atlantic, every time the sky turned black and the sea roared, the light returned, bright, defiant, alive. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was faith. Or maybe, just maybe, it was their way of reminding the world that, even after all this time, they were still keeping watch. And if you ever find yourself driving that lonely coastal road at night, with rain beating on your windshield and fear whispering in your heart, look toward the cliffs. You might see it too. That same golden light cutting through the darkness. A promise kept. A forgiveness given. A love that never went out.